Welcome everyone to our webinar. This is a webinar for Kiwi lawyers looking to move around the globe. My name is Hayden Gordine. I'm based in Sydney, and also on the webinar we have Sean Murphy, who's based in Melbourne. Sean is from Gisborne. He went to the university in Auckland and worked as a lawyer for Simpson Grierson. I'm from Napier and went to uni down in Otago. I started my legal career in Auckland at Metelli McKeag before I embarked on my OE after a very similar presentation in Auckland by Taylor Root. So I went and met them in person, and they found me a job in London. So I sort of backpacked around Southeast Asia. I arrived in London with no job, but I was kind of ready to interview. This is back in 2006, so quite some time ago. I delivered furniture for about 5 weeks before I secured a job at a top law firm in London called Charles Russell Speechy. Back in Metelli McKeag in Auckland, I was very much a corporate commercial lawyer. Did sort of lease work in the morning and sort of sell and purchase agreements in the afternoon. But in London, I'd very much secured my job as a big city corporate lawyer focusing on M&A. After a time at Charles Russell, I joined a US law firm as a private equity lawyer, as a 3-year PQE lawyer in London. It's about 5 PQE New Zealand. To be very honest, I was making more money than I could have imagined. I lived and worked in London for 6 years, followed by a year in Singapore, followed by 7 years in Hong Kong, and now 4 years in Sydney. So having worked in these international markets and lived overseas for so many years, I have a good understanding of working and living internationally. But most importantly, I sat in your shoes and I moved abroad as a lawyer. One of the big positives about speaking to you this year rather than last year is the market really has picked up. There are some great opportunities out there presently. During today's webinar, we're going to cover off the London market and the Australian market in great detail. We'll also touch on a few markets you might not have thought of. The offshore market in particular is very buoyant and always is for Kiwis, as well as the Middle East, the Asian markets, and the US market briefly. As I mentioned earlier, there is the Q&A section, so pop anything you can in there and we'll answer that. So look, what I want to get across today is one of the big issues with your OE is really the lack of certainty. Unfortunately, there is so many unknowns with a move overseas, but we do hope today we can kind of assist with providing some clarity about those overseas options. I'm quickly going to share my screen so you can see a bit of a presentation of what we've got today for you. Just if that's going to work. Maybe it's not going to work. Yeah, just quickly about Taylor Root. I know Taylor Root isn't in the New Zealand market, so just a little bit about us. So we're established in London in 1989. We've been in Australia just as long. We're one of the biggest and best legal recruitment firms in the world. We've been doing this for over 35 years, and we've moved thousands of lawyers from New Zealand and Australia to international markets. As I mentioned, they moved me from Auckland to London many years ago. We've got 13 offices around the world. As you can see, we're based throughout the UK, throughout Europe, the USA, and the Middle East. Before we talk about locations, I really wanted to cover off demand. Demand for Kiwi lawyers still remains high. Obviously, we've gone from some huge peaks of demand for Kiwi lawyers in the midst of COVID in 2021 and at the start of 22. We've then moved into a bit of doom and gloom for the international markets in 2023, but that market is definitely coming back, and we've seen that already just from the instructions we've been getting from our international clients. International markets like Kiwis for 3 reasons. We're well trained, we work hard, and then we return home back to New Zealand. So law firms will get the best out of you for 2 or 3 years. And just when you're starting to talk about partnership, training and developing you, investing more money in you, you pack up your bags and you move home. In all honesty, they know that when they recruit you, and it's a win-win for all parties. It's essentially the reason why so many Kiwis and also Australian lawyers get jobs, is we come in, we work really hard as an associate level. They get a lot of value out of us, and then we move home. As I sort of mentioned earlier, one of the biggest uncertainties of moving overseas is securing a job. If you're moving to Australia, Asia, any of the offshore markets, Dubai, it's very likely we will secure you a role before you go overseas. London is a lot less certain. Unless you're working at one of the top law firms in New Zealand, there is a very good chance you will be unable to secure a role before you land on the ground in the UK. The reason for this is that the UK law firms have options and an abundance of candidates, and your future employer is likely to want to interview for you in person. So what you've got to remember is I would say up to sort of 70, 80% of all New Zealand lawyers that depart this year for the UK will not have a job when they leave New Zealand, but will secure a job in the first few weeks of landing there. In my case, if you look at me, I had my CV out with Taylor Root about 6 weeks before I landed in London, and I had about 3 or 4 interviews arranged when I got there. It took a good month before I secured my first role, but I was very much in that process as I traveled around Southeast Asia. If you're lucky enough to work at one of those top Kiwi law firms, we do have opportunities to secure your roles before departing, and that's especially so if you're a transactional lawyer, private equity, banking, restructuring. Unfortunately, if you are one of those lawyers, we're not seeing as many great relocation packages as we did in 2021, 22. Some of those law firms will pay for your flights, your visa, your first month's accommodation, and in some cases a sign-on bonus. But currently that is really market dependent and sort of depends. In terms of practice groups also, roles overseas tend to be more specialized than in New Zealand. So rather than being a corporate lawyer or corporate and commercial lawyer like you like I was, you're dressed up as sort of a private equity or a M&A lawyer, or you're a front-end construction lawyer or a project lawyer. So if you are in those broad roles, have a think about, your specialism and where you want to see yourself. Like I was given that advice when I moved over there. They were like, look, you're a corporate commercial lawyer. We want to make you specialize in M&A lawyer. And that's how my career really took off, from just having that niche specialism. Transaction lawyers are always going to be in the highest demand. So they're lawyers practicing corporate capital markets, banking and funds. If you are a New Zealand lawyer in those practice areas, there's a good chance you'll get a role before you head over, because there's such a demand in that. Demand is also generally fairly good in other practice areas like IP, IT, TMT. Construction's a big one at the moment. There's a lot of demand for construction, and niche practices like employment and competition. As I mentioned, like construction in Australia is absolutely booming at the moment. Real estate tends to go up and down. So unfortunately, we're in a downward cycle. And then where we've traditionally struggled is lawyers with commercial litigation experience. Generally speaking, contentious lawyers struggle securing position overseas due to the oversupply of local lawyers and New Zealand lawyers' lack of international arbitration experience. If you are in New Zealand, you have a specialized contentious experience, so like banking litigation, construction litigation, IP, IT litigation, it goes a long way to getting a similar role overseas. If you are a litigator, don't worry at all. You can still move overseas. You just need to be a little bit more potentially flexible on the role you're looking for, the firm you're looking for. In-house could be an option. London is still one of the best places for litigation lawyers, and you just might have to be, look at the regulators, or think of another location like the Cayman Islands, for instance. In-house is another really good option for in-house lawyers that are looking to go overseas. Generally speaking, it ebbs and flows in terms of that level of demand. The more specialized your practice area in-house, the more likely you're going to get a role. in-house clients tend not to recruit lawyers directly out of New Zealand. They prefer you to be on the ground there, where we can go into more detail of that. It really depends on where you're working at the moment and what your skill set is. But generally speaking, the in-house market is very good. And a lot of Kiwi lawyers will go from private practice directly into in-house once they're on the ground. I appreciate most of you are keen to talk about probably the London market, but I do really want to quickly cover off just highlighting those highest in demand areas. But I do want to cover off the Australian market just quickly. Traditionally, Kiwi lawyers have seen the Australian market as somewhere to come back to from their time overseas. Just in the last couple of years, though, we've seen more and more Kiwi lawyers come to Australia as an alternative, and I think a lot of that is due to COVID. You kind of be closer to home and things like that, but also as an alternative to gain experience before moving to London. You need around 2 to 3 years PQE to move in London because of the reduction in the PQE rate. In Australia, you need about 9 to 12 months, so about a year to secure a role. So it can be very good to come to Australia for 2 years and then move on to London at the same time as your New Zealand colleagues. It's especially good if you're trying to enhance your resume. Not only has Australia more international law firms, they're more internationally recognised, but the transactions are bigger, more complex, and therefore will help you secure a role internationally in years to come. You also can't forget the lifestyle in Australia. The sun, surf, in Sydney is utterly amazing. Obviously, the CAFs and the events culture in Melbourne is second to none. We obviously have Taylor Swift here this week and next week, when I know there'll be a lot of people in New Zealand that don't. So good from a concerts perspective as well. Both cities are amazing to work and live in. Your salaries will be considerably higher than what you'd be getting in New Zealand, and that experience here is second to none. The other thing you need to know about moving to Australia is that you have full working rights as New Zealand citizens, so you don't have to worry about the rigmarole of a working visa. Australian law firms are divided into 3 categories: top tier, mid tier, and the international boutiques. The top tier firms that you'd come across are Allens, Ashurst, Clayton Utz, Cause, G&T, and Minters. A lot of these firms also have international offices and international arrangements. So, for instance, Allens is tied up with Linklaters. So you have a lot of lawyers will move automatically from Allens in Sydney or Melbourne to Linklaters in London. I think last year there was about 30 lawyers that did that. Same with Herbert Smith Freehills. And then you have other firms like, Ashurst obviously in London, but you have other firms like Cause, who have very good working relationships with Slaughter and May. Some of your law firms in New Zealand will have those sort of relationships as well. The mid-tier firms that you might not come across are sort of Landers and Rogers, Holden Redlich, Mills Oakley. And then we also have the other international firms here, the Allen and Overys, the Clifford Chance, the DLA Pipers, Jones Day, and Canal Gates. As you can see, the salaries in Australia are fairly good. These are actually all in New Zealand dollars. So as a 2-year PQE lawyer, you can earn between sort of 90 to 140,000, moving to a mid-tier and a top tier. And generally speaking, we're moving most Kiwi lawyers to the mid-tier and the top tier rather than to the boutiques. It's a pretty good uplift on what we are seeing Kiwi lawyers are earning. As a 3-year lawyer, that increases significantly. We're talking sort of a 100K plus to 150K plus in terms of those salaries. It's good money, particularly compared to some of those top tier rates in New Zealand from that. So in terms of demand in Australia, we have jobs across all sectors, but like most international markets, we have less demand in litigation. And a lot of demand at the moment in construction, corporate, capital markets, banking and finance. We're still getting the occasional real estate role and things like that. So generally a broad spectrum of practice areas are in demand here. So now on to the London market. Excuse me. You can walk into any law firm in London, any pub in London, and I guarantee you there'll be a Kiwi there. Traveling and working in the UK has been a rite of passage for us for generations. The big OE, as we like to call it, obviously. We've got historical ties. There's no language barriers. It's a very similar legal system. And Europe is literally on the doorstep. The UK has been a natural fit for us Kiwi lawyers wishing to work abroad and accelerate our career and travel the world. There are many great reasons why Kiwis move to the UK. For me, one of the most enjoyable part was working and living in London, was traveling through Europe. Ireland, Scotland, France, Spain, boat trips around Croatia and Greece, destinations like the Eiffel Tower. I remember going through the Nile, sailing up the Nile and visiting the pyramids. I saw it all. I loved it. Travel was a big part of it. Then you have London itself, everything you'd imagine, from Big Ben and Buckingham Palace to the West End, the pubs. The nightlife's amazing, the history, the culture, the parks, the sport, whether it's the English Premiership Leagues with All Blacks visiting Twickenham. It's amazing from that perspective. Look, it's cold in winter. It's pretty much the number one complaint we hear from any Kiwi lawyers is how we're going to survive the winter. UK, it's very well catered for it. It's actually probably warmer than New Zealand most of the time, except when you're outside. Summer, look, it's up and down. Some days are hot. The best thing about it, it's light to 10:30 p.m., which is utterly amazing. And then you can't forget, literally an hour away is the Mediterranean. The flight from Auckland to Wellington, you're basically going from London to the south of France. So it's not all that bad from that perspective. Now on to the kind of the UK market. First and foremost, I want to talk about PQE, or post-qualification experience. UK lawyers complete a 2-year training contract before qualifying as a lawyer. During that training contract, they will complete 4 6-month seats, including 1 contentious seat. At the end of the 2 years, they are offered a qualified position in a practice group, which is known as being newly qualified. Because New Zealand lawyers don't complete a training contract, we are traditionally discounted 2 years PQE. So if you have 2 years experience in New Zealand, you will be considered an NQ in London. If you have 4 years experience in New Zealand, you'll be considered a 2-year PQE in London. Now, if you're that is from when you qualify as lawyers. You might do a graduate year in some law firms in New Zealand. That will count and help from the discounting point of view. So if you do a graduate year and then you're considered a lawyer from 1 year later, you only be discounted 1 year from that. It's generally speaking, we're talking from date of admission, because that is their date of admission after that 2-year contract. In some instances, the more senior you get, they will reduce that PQE level, and they will often reassess that as you go through and align you more and more to the PQE that you are performing at. Generally speaking, though, apply the 2-year discount. There's been a lot of lawyers that have moved to the UK and the US and things like that recently who have, felt a little bit out for depths and have stayed at their PQE and haven't been pushed up a year. So you can see how they reassess you and are very good at that from that perspective. So look, I would generally say the rule of thumb ideally is to do 3 years experience in New Zealand. It just puts you outside that NQ level in London, where there's an abundance of candidates, and it's a little bit more difficult getting a role there. If you're 1 year PQE, it tends to really help from that perspective. The UK law firm is made up of a broad spectrum of firms, ranging from independent and boutique practices through to global firms, which are either headquartered in the UK or satellite offices of US firms. Typical law firm categories, which you'll hear discussed constantly, are the US Elite, the Magic Circle, the Silver Circle, International, West End, Boutique, and Regional. To manage your expectations, the US Elite are really only seeking lawyers from the top-ranked New Zealand law firms, and largely from corporate and banking and restructuring. The compensation from US law firms is outstanding. I recently moved a lawyer from Wellington. I think he was on about 78,000 New Zealand dollars, and we got him 160,000 pounds. So that's roughly around 350,000 New Zealand dollars If you're lucky enough to have that experience, the UK market really is your oyster. US practices now form a large part of the London market elite. They've gone through substantial growth in the last sort of 10, 15 years. They've secured a lot of the heavyweight partners from Clifford Chance and Ella and Overy, the Magic Circle, and have become some of the biggest UK practices. They all tend to be corporate law firms, hence the recruitment of only transactional lawyers. They have large corporate capital markets, finance and restructuring practices, but they don't tend to practice employment or IT, for instance. US firms pay well. It's life-changing money, but it's a trade-off in extremely long hours, things like 3,000 billable hours plus weekend work. And generally speaking, they're known for a lack of training and support. Some of the bigger US firms have got much better at that. Latham & Watkins, Skadden now have excellent training and support structures that are on par with the US and Magic Circle law firms. The culture of US law firms isn't for everyone. But if you want to work on the best deals with the best lawyers in London, then you want to work for a US law firm. The Magic Circle is the next category, the famous law firms of London, names such as Allen & Overy, Clifford Chance, Freshfield, Slaughter and May. These are the UK elite corporate law firms. What sets these firms apart from the rest of the UK market is that they are big, they are all headquartered in London, and they have sizable international operations. You go into Clifford Chance's office, for instance, they have a creche there, they have doctors there, they have physios there. Everything you could want is literally inside that office. All of them have training lawyer intakes of about 100 lawyers a year, and they have a reputation for working lawyers hard and demanding a lot of them. The work is heavily focused on corporate and finance. These departments stand at the heart of the Magic Circle firms. Teams like employment, tax, IP, IT often play a very supportive advisory role in facilitating those transactions. And a big bulk of that litigation work there is finance in nature. So they are a little bit broader in terms of the practice areas they take on. When it comes to US versus Magic Circle, the number one difference really is money. I'll bring those figures up. In terms of New Zealand dollars, again, I'll put these into Kiwi dollars so you can understand it easier. There's a big difference, for a 3-year PQE lawyer obtaining a 1-year PQE role in London can be more than 100,000 New Zealand dollars. You're likely to work the same long hours, so why not get that extra $100,000? This is a very present debate and one that you'll hear a lot about in London if you are interviewing for those US Magic Circle firms. The reason as to why you shouldn't give into salary temptation, perhaps, even longer hours, the billable targets of US law firms, the always-on expectation, more demanding and unrelenting partners, the lack of formal trading, the heavy emphasis on funds and private equity work rather than listed and private equity work. So that doesn't correspond to work back in New Zealand in the future. And it's also an outpost of a larger US headquartered law firm as opposed to working for a London UK headquartered firm. The money is undoubtedly the major driving force to move to a US law firm. From my perspective as a Kiwi lawyer who worked for a US law firm, the hardest thing was the always-on expectation, cancelling holidays to Europe, for the weekend with about 15 minutes before I was about to do my mates. I think I worked every Sunday for 6 months. It was great money, but there is a real trade-off in terms of what you give up from a lifestyle perspective. So it really depends on what your motivations are when you go into London, if it's just for 2 years to work and enjoy, or if you're really going for your career. Under the Magic Circle, we have the Silver Circle. I'm going to include all city law firms in the top 50 here. The top Silver Circle firms are Ashurst, HSF, Hogan Lovells, Norton Rose. They are the traditional Silver Circle. Then you have city law firms like CMS, Simmons, Taylor Weston, Clyde & Co. Just so you know, a city law firm is that of a law firm headquartered in the square mile of London. And then you have firms that are just out of that square mile. I'm literally talking 100 meters. Stephenson Harwood, Charles Russell Speechley, who I joined when I arrived in London. What I should be very clear about is that every law firm in the top 50 is bigger than any law firm in New Zealand. So you're not exactly joining a small law firm. Even at number 49, Hill Dickinson has 175 partners and 840 staff in London. I believe that's bigger than Bell Gully when you combine Auckland and Wellington together. So as you can see, they are still very big law firms. Traditionally, the Silver Circle, city law firms, and the top UK law firms are very popular with Kiwi lawyers with a blend of competitive salaries and better work-life balance. They're also full-service law firms covering litigation, construction, TMT, employment litigation. They're also more social. They have Friday night drinks. They have sports clubs, social teams, and full of people that can actually tend those because they're not stuck on deals. Silver Circle and city law firms are also a great place to go for a year or so, get UK experience, and then move to a Magic Circle or US law firm, because that'll help you in terms of that kind of progression if you really want to get the UK sooner rather than later. The salaries are lower, however. Using that example of a 3-year PQE lawyer obtaining a 1-year PQE role, a Silver Circle role could be about 50K less than a Magic Circle role and about 150K less than the US law firm. However, it's a great salary compared to those who are earning money in New Zealand. What I often tell lawyers moving from New Zealand is you're trying to want to get the same pound value as your current salary. So if you are earning 60,000 New Zealand dollars, then you should be trying to earn at least 60,000 pounds. Now onto visas for the UK. It's very important in terms of your move, in terms of what you can what kind of jobs and things like that. So depending on your age and situation, there's a range of visas that will allow you to work. If you're lucky enough to have a British passport or a Tier 1 visa, then you have unrestricted access to the UK market. If you obtain a role from New Zealand before departing, you'll be sponsored from that law firm under what is called a Tier 2 working visa. The law firm sponsoring you will cover all the costs and make the arrangement. This visa is valid up for 2 years. And then if you're looking to settle beyond that, there's indefinite leave to remain. If you do not secure a role from New Zealand, the law firm will also cover the cost of the relocation, things like that. The last option and the most often used option is a Tier 5 youth mobility scheme. This option is open to anyone under at time of flying under the age of 35 now. This allows you to reside and work in the UK for 2 years with no restrictions on employment. Now, most employers will look to sponsor you onto a Tier 5 visa from your Tier 2 visa from your Tier 5 visa, so that you can stay longer. So if you go there under your Tier 5, don't worry, as you can always secure a Tier 2 visa from a law firm. In terms of qualification, most New Zealand lawyers moving to the UK won't be England and Wales qualified, although it's a pretty relatively straightforward to practice as a foreign qualified lawyer without requalifying. In some circumstances, a law firm will ask you to cross-qualify by undertaking the QLT scheme. It's not a requirement to practice, however, but it may be beneficial if you're looking to stay in the UK long-term or potentially looking for an in-house role or a contentious role. But it's not something I would overly worry about before you move to the UK. I'm just going to check out some of these questions now, see if they're in regards to the UK market. So I'll just start sharing there. 2 seconds. Oh, they're not popping up for some reason. Whatever experience is required to seek opportunities, but hopefully that that sort of worked for you from that perspective. Do you have an idea of the market like from the northeast of the UK? We have a office up there in Birmingham and I think Manchester, so I'd have to sort of get them to pass it on to you. Environmental law, curious about demand for environmental law. Definitely a pickup in those sort of types of roles. They have more specialized ECG legal departments in the UK than we do in New Zealand, and we're even seeing that a little bit more about that here. Public sector, public law roles. Again, look, I've got friends that are lawyers that have moved over there and have worked for Westminster City Council, for instance, have worked for the government over there. Those roles are certainly there, but you would need to sort of probably move over and have a look at those. What's your suggested lead time for securing a job before going overseas? It's about 6. I would say you probably want to talk to us the day you have flights booked is probably the ideal from that perspective. I'll just carry on now with the overseas market and then come back to some more of the questions shortly. So I'll just go back to that presentation. I was going to talk about some of the other markets that we recruit in. I hope that's come across. Oh, just jumped ahead. Sorry. So let's just get to the. Sorry, my slides are a bit mucked up here. So I'm just talking about Asia. It's a place that I've worked and lived in for 10 years. I lived in both Singapore and Hong Kong. Hong Kong is fully open again. There obviously had been some restrictions there with COVID up until really mid last year. Now, ideally with the Hong Kong and even the mainland China market, Mandarin language skills are a huge advantage. They're not a requirement unless you really are looking to practice in Shanghai, Beijing, where you would need a language skill for that. Both destinations are great to work in. They're both low tax environments, and you have an excellent amount of work. If you're a corporate lawyer, M&A, banking and finance, capital markets, employment, both options are really excellent for you. If you have M&A or mining energy projects focus, I would highly recommend Singapore. Singapore really is a compelling option at the moment. You work on high-profile deals on both the sponsor and lender side. It's nice and close to New Zealand. You can also enjoy trips to Australia and Bali, Thailand. And the other advantage of Hong Kong and Singapore is that Europe is only one flight away. So it's very easy to meet your friends on ski trips around Europe or on boat trips in Croatia, things like that. So just to show you some of those salaries in New Zealand dollars for Singapore and Hong Kong. Another market we've been moving a lot of New Zealand lawyers to is the Middle East. We've placed lawyers in the Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. Recently has been quite a popular spot. Lesser extent, Oman and Kuwait. Most expats tend to look at Dubai and Abu Dhabi. They're the most Western of those Middle Eastern countries, and probably the practice areas where we see a lot of demand for, the countries where we see a lot of demand for Kiwis with the certain practice areas. Again, corporate and banking, and good demand there. Construction projects, oil and gas, power, energy and water, infrastructure, renewables, and any of those sort of industrial experience, you'll likely find a great job in the Middle East. Look, it goes a long way in terms of having obviously a Middle Eastern delegate. That's a great environment to go, particularly because it's income tax free. So it's a great place to go to save a lot of money from that perspective. Just want to cover off the offshore market. It's not a market that a lot of Kiwis think about, but it's a really good market, particularly if you are a litigator. But we also place a lot of funds lawyers there, a lot of banking lawyers, and quite a few corporate lawyers as well. In terms of locations, the most common one is the Cayman Islands, which is obviously just off Miami. We do quite a few people in the British Virgin Islands, which is in the Caribbean, again, about 2 hours from Miami. And then to a lesser extent, but also quite good from a New Zealand point of view, particularly for litigators, is the Channel Islands of Jersey and Guernsey, which are just between France and the UK. It's about a 30-minute flight from London or Paris each way, so very close to those. The offshore market is a great place for those seeking sun and surf and zero tax. They work very good working hours. It's very much a 9-to-5 culture. And as I sort of mentioned, they tend to be very banking and finance focused, funds, insolvency and trust work as well, and commercial litigation. You will need a minimum of 3 years working experience to be considered for most of those jurisdictions, particularly the Cayman Islands and Bermuda. The Channel Islands is a great one if you've got less than that. You might want to go get a little bit of experience in the offshore markets in Jersey or Guernsey, which would then propel you into to the UK markets from that perspective. Lastly, I just want to touch off on the US. I'll just stop sharing. Unfortunately for New Zealanders at the moment, it's quite difficult to move to the US, unlike Australians who have easy access to the US market. Kiwis require an H1 visa, which is essentially going into a lottery system. If you are a corporate lawyer or a banking lawyer and you want to move to the US, particularly New York, we can help. It's a long process, but we have moved Kiwi lawyers there in the past from that perspective. I'll just go on to finish off some of the questions we got. I'm keen to hear about the US UE market. In terms of the UE market, look, when the UK was part of the UE, we placed a lot of lawyers into Brussels just because of the need to have Commonwealth lawyers based out of there. It's been less so since. You know, if you're a competition lawyer and things like that, it had been easy to move to Brussels. But look, we have placed lawyers and transaction lawyers into Paris, into Berlin, and places like that. So there's definitely a market there that we can look into. Also, we have offices there. It's just not as much of a traditional route. And then obviously the visa requirement now, the UK passport doesn't get you in as quite as easy. Do you know much about the in-house legal market in London? Any advice? I worked the in-house market in London for many years. It's probably best to give me a call. We can discuss it. Again, it really depends on what you are doing in-house at the moment. The more specialized you are, the more likely you'll get a job there. But it's a great market from that perspective. What is the cost of living in Sydney in comparison to average salaries? Look, I'm not going to lie. Sydney is expensive when you look at any comparisons in terms of you know, places to live and cost of living. In saying that, I find going back to New Zealand more expensive than being in Sydney. But your rental, your tax higher in Australia, your rental is a little bit higher, but I go back to the supermarket in New Zealand and find it extremely expensive compared to what we're paying here. So normally, you know, your increase in salary would easily offset what your cost of living increases would be. What's the market like for lawyers with 12 years PQE, or senior lawyers, I should say, in the UK? Look, it's just very competitive. They will be expecting you, if you're looking at any of those law firms, to be performing of a 10-year PQE lawyer in the UK. So because of the deal size and that they've been working on for a number of times, it's often hard to be able to match that. So sometimes you just got to be a little bit more flexible and say, look, I want to just come in as a 5 year, 6 years PQE lawyer. But look, we can have a good discussion of that if you'd like to reach out. Any tips on how to prepare a CV for the London market? Look, it's like a CV for any other market, to be perfectly honest. What I'd be focusing on really is what you've been doing for the last 2 or 3 years. The roles you did, a milk run or working at McDonald's and stuff like that, you can take off now. That's how you got your first job. And then also a transactional list is the other big tip that we need. So running through all the transactions that you've been on, and also your involvement in that. So whether you were a lead associate or whether you were part of the associate team and things like that. But look, we're very obviously, we've moved thousands of lawyers overseas, so we can certainly help you in terms of preparing that CV and redrafting that CV for you. Another question is, do we recruit in-house roles, and do we have relocation packages for 6 to 7 year PQE lawyers? To be perfectly honest, it's very difficult to get a relocation package as a New Zealand lawyer moving in-house over any in-house role, largely because of the fact there is lawyers on the ground in London that could easily fill those positions. There will be demand. So you will be interviewing against people that are on the ground in London that would be interested in that role. So they traditionally do not pay relocation packages. So you'd have to find your own way across there. The last question, another question I've got a practice as a barrister in London, then moved to New Zealand, became New Zealand qualified, quite senior now from that perspective. Any in-house roles in UK Middle East for former barristers? I mean, look, from that perspective, I would say you're probably relying more on your New Zealand qualifications than your barrister qualifications. Look, we'd be looking for a senior role. So yeah, look, there's definitely prospects from that perspective that we can talk about. So happy to have a look at that for you. Another question: if you have a UK passport, is it common to start working in New Zealand before moving to the UK? Look, I would say it's very common. Again, it all comes down to PQE and level of experience. You could, though, if you have a UK passport, start applying for UK training contracts. I had a friend who got a UK training contract from New Zealand, had a UK passport, so they then moved across to London and joined Linklaters on a training contract for 2 years before coming qualified. So that just sort of opens up another option for you from that perspective. But to actually practice in the UK, you need to do the training contract. So look, in conclusion, we've got a wide range of options for you internationally. So the world really is your choice. We recognise you have a choice of recruiters as well, and look, Taylor Root has dedicated offices throughout the world and dedicated consultants like Sean and myself who only focus on moves internationally. You also have a point of contact who is a Kiwi lawyer or Kiwi lawyers in terms of Sean and myself. I've made the move. I know the ups and downs. I know what it's like to first land in London and be completely lost. I know what it's like, starting your first day in a big city law firm. There's lots of things to sort out, and there's lots of issues and things like that. So we're here to help you. We're here to hold your hands, guide you for this daunting prospect. And there's obviously a lot of uncertainty involved. As with those questions, it's hard to answer those without speaking to you personally and going through those options. So please do reach out. Thank you for joining our webinar. I hope it's given you some insight into those international markets. And then if you are looking to make a move, please do reach out. The process time in terms of attaining a role from New Zealand, it can take anywhere from 2 to 5 months if we're trying to secure you something beforehand. The interview process is normally 1 or 2 months, and then you expect the role, and they'd probably want you to over there within 3 months. So look, at any point, we can start working with you. If you want to be in the UK for summer, you want to go to Wimbledon, you want to go to Glastonbury, then you probably need to be in touch with us now and we start working through some options for you. Look, the dream result is summer. So I'd be definitely looking at some options now to get across there. But look, thank you so much for your time. I've got one more question. Who's the best to reach out to? We'll come back with your Sean and myself are the best to reach out to. We're the ones that sort of move. But look, Sean is great from that perspective. He's got a lot of knowledge as well. So please reach out to both of us, and we can help out from that perspective. But we'll send you a quick follow-up email with our contact details so you can speak to us. Otherwise, have a great day, and cheers.